I begged them to kill me. A Tennessee woman recounts being raped by two men who kidnapped her in broad daylight in Chattanooga in 1955. The woman told her story to a crime magazine in 1956. I have known the greatest horror that can come to a woman. Prisoner of two ruthless men, I shrank beneath the blows of their cruel fists, felt blood trickle down my neck where their knives cut me, sobbed with pain and shame during their assaults until I begged them to kill me. They were too evil even to grant that request, keeping me alive for their own unspeakable purposes. And through the bravery of a federal park ranger, I go on living now, sometimes waking at night with my own cries, fearful of so many things, my nerves on raw edge. It helps little even to know that the beasts who did this to me are condemned to die in the electric chair. Yes, they will walk into that little room, feel the straps tightened about their arms and legs, no sudden darkness when the black hood is slipped over their heads. Their bodies will leap against the straps and what solace they possess will answer to their shell court for their crimes. But will that help me to forget the terror-filled hours when they worked their evil will with me? I don't know. Perhaps telling the whole story here will help to cleanse my mind of it. It might even help some other defenseless woman to avoid what I went through by realizing what fiends can roam a daylight city, and by taking some simple precautions to thwart them. First, let me point out that Margaret Johnson is not my real name. Officials of the FBI and the states of Tennessee and Georgia have kindly helped me to conceal my true identity because of the viciousness of the crimes perpetrated against me. But everything else I shall relate is exactly as it happened to me on that Black Thursday of April 14, 1955. It was a pleasant morning in my city, Chattanooga, Tennessee. I remember sniffing the spring air appreciatively as I drove from my home to the pharmacy owned by my brother, where I work. Since I have reached my middle years and have had a rather serious operation, I have learned to enjoy little things which most persons take for granted, like green lawns and shrubs in bloom. I had no inkling that this day would be any different from countless others. Living alone, working in a drugstore, and finding your amusement in books and music and television leads you to believe that strange and terrible things happen only in fiction stories, not on the streets you walk every day. I opened the store at 8 a.m. and waited on several customers who came in. About 10 o'clock, my brother and my mother arrived to take over. Mother and I discussed a little trip I would have to make to the wholesale drug house on Market Street, Chattanooga, and to the North Chattanooga branch of the American National Bank and Trust Company. I do not recall that anyone was in the store and overheard this conversation which could, conceivably, have put potential bandits on my trail. At about 1 p.m., I started blithely out, driving the black Ford business coupe which my brother owns, and it was when I stepped into that car that I made my first mistake. I did not lock the door. The right-hand door was locked, but the one on my left, the driver's side, I left unlocked. If I had taken that one little precaution, I might have saved myself terrible agony. Every woman who drives should remember always to lock all car doors. Every husband should impress on his wife the importance of it. But unsuspecting, unprepared, I drove to the 1100 block of Market Street, arriving there at 1:15. The wholesale drug firm was on the other side of the street. In order to get over there, I drove past to the service station at 1143 Market Street. I swung into the station and waited for traffic to clear so that I could make a U-turn and go back on the proper side of the street. But unsuspecting, unprepared, I drove to the 1100 block of Market Street, arriving there at 1:15. The wholesale drug firm was on the other side of the street. In order to get over there, I drove past to the service station at 1143 Market Street. I swung into the station and waited for traffic to clear so that I could make a U-turn and go back on the proper side of the street. I did not even see him approach the man I now know as George Krull. One moment I was watching the traffic, waiting for my chance to pull out. The next instant the door beside me was opened and a man was pushing his way in, shoving me across the seat before him. I looked at him in absolute amazement, first expecting to recognize some friend playing a joke on me. But I had never seen the hard eyes, the strangely shrunken cheeks before. The thought flashed into my mind, he's making a mistake. He'll be embarrassed when he realizes that he doesn't know me. It was then that I saw the wicked-looking knife in his left hand. I couldn't believe this was happening. My heart began to pound madly. Now the knife was against my left side, the sharp point pricking through my dress, into my skin. "Be quiet," the man snarled menacingly. "If you scream, I'll kill you." I believed that he would do it, and at that moment, I wanted to live. How I was to wish later that I had just opened my mouth and screamed my lungs out. Then he might have killed me and I would have been better off. It's strange how alert your mind can be in a sudden emergency. I could see this stranger, feel his knife in my side, still hear his threat. Yet I was wondering what I could do, how I could escape. From the corner of my right eye, I saw another man at the right side door of the car. He took hold of the door handle, tried to open it, but it was locked. I thought, he's coming to help me. He's seen this man with a knife and he's trying to open the door so that I can jump out and he can fight him off. I reached up suddenly and pulled the handle so that the right door swung open. But I didn't have a chance to leap out of the car. Before I could move, this second man was pushing his way in too. He was smaller than the other man, about 5 feet 8 and lighter, but wiry and strong. I felt myself squeezed between the two of them, and I saw that the second man also held a knife in his right hand. This, I later learned, was Michael Krull, 31, brother of the first man. George Krull was 33. I was too terrified to move. What is it? What do you want? I managed to ask. We want money, lots of money, Michael Krull said, and we want the registration papers for this car. I heaved an involuntary sigh of relief. If that was all they wanted, I might get off easily. I don't have any money with me, I confessed, or the car registration papers either. Did I think that they would simply take my word for it? I don't know. It was a plain statement of fact. I didn't have a penny or the registration. I almost expected them to get out of the car and walk away. You're lying. Michael Krull snapped. George Krull had put the car into gear and was turning out into the street. I felt the hard bodies on either side of me. My arms were pressed very close to my sides. We were going along the streets so familiar to me, passing stores where I had traded, and yet it seemed weird and bizarre. I felt almost disembodied, as if this was happening to someone else, not to me. But I was brought rudely back to reality. The moment we were at a place where not so many people could see us, Michael Krull tore at the neck of my dress and jammed his hand into my brassiere. Where do you keep the money? He snarled. Give it to me, do you hear? I pushed at his hand. I haven't any money. I cried. I told you the truth. He turned suddenly in the seat and his hand flashed out, coming back as a fist. It exploded in my face, so sharp that it didn't really hurt at the moment. Lights danced in my eyes and I had the salty taste in my mouth that was blood. Then you'll get some, he said, or you'll be dead. It was the cruel force of that blow that made me realize that these men meant exactly what they said. They were not going to weaken, become sorry for me because I was a woman. Such fiends would only delight in tormenting someone who could not defend herself. Michael Krull's fist thudded into my body, driving out my breath, and I gasped in pain. Again and again he struck me. Please, I said, don't. I can get you some money. Now you're talking, George Krull said. He kept his eyes on the road as he drove. How much can you get? I thought I would tempt them so that they would be sure to let me go. And I was willing to pay any sum and then save up to pay it back. I'll get you $1,000, I said. Drive me to my brother's pharmacy and I'll get you the money and the papers for the car. $1,000, Michael Krull said. That's better. All this time we were driving around the streets of South Chattanooga. When I told them the address of my brother's drugstore, George Krull drove to that neighborhood. We even drove directly past the store and I could have cried to see so close the place. That represented security and protection to me. But with those men and their knives at each side of me, the store might just as well have been on the moon for all the good it could do me. They were talking across me. You go in the store and tell them we have her and get the money, George Krull said. I'll keep her out in the car in case they try any funny business. Okay, Michael Krull said. You're going past it, I said. I knew my brother and mother would be glad to pay them to win my release. My heart sank further when they kept on going. Aren't you going in? I've changed my mind, George said. They were both nervous and excited. I think that, from one moment to the next, they did not know what they were going to do. It's too risky. We'll have to think of something else, George added. Now we were heading down Market Street to Main Street, away from my last hope. We turned onto Rossville Boulevard. We kept on driving south and I knew that we had crossed the state line into Georgia. Cars were going past us in the opposite direction and I prayed that someone I knew would see us, someone who would know that there was something wrong if I were riding in a car like that with two strange men. People looked at us, but just as you look, unsuspecting, at anyone in a passing car. I didn't dare make a sound or sign, with those knives against me. But my mind was clear. I thought there must be a way out of this. Look, I said desperately. Why don't you stop and telephone to my mother? She'll arrange to give you the money and the car papers, if you'll tell her how to do it. That's a good idea, George Krull said. We'll do that. We were on the outskirts of the town of Rossville, Georgia. They pulled up near a restaurant or grill of some kind, and George Krull stuck his knife back in my left side. Bend your head way down so nobody will notice you, he commanded. Then he told his brother, go make that call. I sat there, my head down almost to my knees, barely daring to breathe. Michael Krull was gone in eternity. How I prayed that he would get the right answers. But something went wrong, just what it was I didn't learn. When he came back, he and his brother talked excitedly in a foreign language. It was the first time they had done that, and I could not understand a word. George Krull put the car into gear and my heart almost stopped beating. He was not turning around, not taking me back to Chattanooga. We were going farther south into Georgia. The men were not planning to release me. They must have decided that what I would get was death or worse. We had only gone 3 blocks when I knew that my most horrible fears were to be realized. Michael Krull looked at me and his mouth twisted in a ghastly grin. I'm going to throw you in the back seat, he said. He grabbed my arms in a steel grip. I have a vertebra that becomes dislocated easily and causes excruciating pain. The force of his grip digging into my arms told me that he would do what he threatened, throw me back there so violently that I might be crippled for life. Wait, I cried. You don't have to do that. On legs that shook with fear, I half crawled, was half pushed to the rear of the car which had no seat. As I sank to the cold metal floor, numb with revulsion, I saw Michael Krull's face swimming before me and felt his foul breath in my face. The pain and anguish which I had suffered from their blows and knife thrusts were nothing compared with what I endured now. I don't know how long I was back there. Perhaps part of the time I lost consciousness. I seemed to be floating in a black night, shot through with lightning flashes of pain. Once I cried out and Michael Krull punched me with his fist. The car stopped, but I could only lie there and moan. Michael Krull took the wheel and George came back and the whole nightmare started over. When I screamed, George Krull jabbed his knife at my throat until it broke through the skin and blood ran down my neck. I'll kill you. I'll kill you, he kept saying. Kill me. I begged, and I meant it. Death would have been sweet deliverance from the horror that seemed to have no ending. Go ahead, please. Kill me. But even death was denied me. It was one threat that they apparently did not intend to carry out yet. Again the car was rolling and I was at the mercy of this beast who knew no mercy. I had lost all track of time. Moments and hours were one long continued throbbing horror. At last, George Krull climbed back to the front seat. I lay there weeping, wondering why this had happened to me and praying that death would free me. I felt the car stop. George Krull looked back and said to me, I'm taking you into the woods. Half consciously I thought, now I am going to die. That will be best. It will be the only thing. He seized my wrist and dragged me from the car. I noticed that it was getting dark. Many hours must have elapsed since my captors forced their way into the car. Michael Krull remained in the car, and it was the last time I was to see him for many weeks. I realized that we were in the Chickamauga-Chattanooga National Military Park. A vast stretch of woods and fields, it was deserted. Here was a place where a heartless fiend could murder a woman at his leisure and bury her where a body might never be found to accuse him. George Krull walked rapidly, never letting go of my wrist. I stumbled along after him in the dusk, my unsteady legs barely able to hold me up. He pulled me up a steep embankment. Then we stumbled down the other side, where we were completely hidden in a ravine. Roughly he threw me to the ground and again he assaulted me. Later he seemed to be scratching at the ground and bushes and he laughed harshly. I'm digging your grave, he said. I hoped it would be over quickly. I did not even know what was happening when rescue suddenly and miraculously appeared in the person of Park Ranger Fred Vanus. But off some little distance in the dusk, a man's figure came into view. At first I thought that it was Michael Krull, coming to rejoin his brother. But George Krull started abruptly. He pressed his knife to my side again. Be quiet, he said. Don't say a word. The man stopped and looked over at us. I could hear his voice as if from a great distance. What's going on over there? He called. George Krull gave no answer. He pulled me to my feet and started along the ravine. We heard the shout again, "Who are you?" We were moving away and the man remained standing where he was. A feeling of hopeless desolation overwhelmed me. He thought we were ordinary petters who sometimes come to the park. As long as we moved on, he probably would not bother us further. Help was within reach and I was going away from it. I tried to call out, but my throat was closed with fear and exhaustion. I couldn't make a sound. The strong grip on my wrist was pulling me along. And then my very weakness saved me. My legs collapsed, unable to carry me any farther. I fell to the rough ground and was pulled along, over stones and through brambles which tore at me. Get up, George Krull snarled. I struggled to my feet, took a few more steps and fell again. Hey there. Wait. I heard the ranger shout. He was running toward us. Krull let go of my wrist and I lay panting, my face against the dirt. You're under arrest, the man called. Like hell I am, Krull yelled back. He fled swiftly up the ravine and scrambled over the bank. Orange flames came from the hand of the running ranger and a shot crashed along the ravine. I heard his footsteps thud past me. But in a few minutes, he came back. Got away, he said. He was bending over me. What's this all about? I looked up into that kind face, that wonderful face of my deliverer, and hot tears spilled out of my eyes and down my cheeks. I cried until I shook with relief and I felt gentle arms raising me and guiding me back to the road. I gasped out that I had been kidnapped and hurt and the ranger told me not to worry, that it was all over, and he would get me to a hospital. I shall never forget the wonderful blessing of those moments when nurses washed me clean and doctors soothed my injuries. And I loved the ominous look on the faces of the law officers as they took down my story and promised me that the men who had done this terrible thing to me would be caught and punished. I thank God. But it was not to be easy. George and Michael Krull, I learned, were hardened criminals with long records. They were adept at evading the law and they were able to fight like tigers when it looked as if they would be called to answer for their crimes. Officers of Chattanooga and Georgia and even the federal government took on the search for them. Because the Krull brothers had kidnapped me and taken me across a state line, I learned that they had violated the Lindbergh Law. Scott S. Alden, special FBI agent in charge of the Knoxville district, became head of the hunt for my abductors. And now other facts came to light. I learned that Lieutenant Kelso Rice and Patrolman W. Mathis of the Chattanooga Police actually had questioned the Krulls and another man on the night before my kidnapping. They had noticed 3 men in a car bearing Missouri license plates parked near Main and Market Streets. Because they looked tough, Lieutenant Rice ordered Patrolman Mathis to check them. One of the men, who was identified as Edward Rufus Bice, 33, said he had just arrived in Chattanooga after being gone 7 years. He drove there from St. Louis. The other men in the car were George and Michael Krull. The Krulls, Rice said, were hitchhikers he had picked up on the road. They gave the address of Bice's mother, in whose home they said they planned to spend the night and they were allowed to go. When I told my story, the officers went to the Bice home, but the men had fled. I was told that my brother's car had been recovered in the park and would be held for a few days while fingerprint experts went over it. Several days went past with no word of the fugitives and then one of the strangest incidents in this strange case occurred. A tiny, thin man named Paul Leroy Allen, 24, came up to a policeman at 4 o'clock in the morning at the bus terminal. Almost everyone in Chattanooga has seen Allen, an amputee and paralytic. He weighs only 80 pounds and is 4 feet, 6 inches tall. Propelling himself in a wheelchair, he sells pencils and surgical dressings on the streets of the city. He rolled himself up to the policeman and said, "I want to tell the FBI about a crime." According to his story, a second car in which Allen and Bice were riding had been following the Krulls and me all of the time. They had even followed us into the park. Allen said that he had seen George Krull after his escape from the ranger and that Krull had told him what had happened. Allen said that when he realized the enormity of the crime, he knew that he could not keep silent. Shortly after taking his statement, officers swooped down on a Peters Street house and arrested Edward Rufus Bice. He gave them the name of a hotel where they arrested George Krull. For all his vaunted toughness, he was taken in custody without a fight. But no one knew or would tell where Michael Krull was. Weeks went by as FBI men hunted for him all over the country. Then, on July 28, 1955, just as the FBI was getting ready to put him on its list of 10 most wanted criminals, Michael Kroll tried another crime in New York City that was to prove his undoing. Despite the fact that he was being sought, Michael Kroll and another man struck up a conversation in a New York bar with Bert Kagan, 22, of Astoria, Queens. After a few drinks, they induced Kagan to go with them to meet some friends, and all three got into a taxicab. As they were riding, they suddenly seized Kagan and robbed him of a $30 wristwatch and $17 in cash. Then they jumped from the cab, but Kagan's shouts caused two policemen to take up the chase, and the robbers were caught. Kroll had barely been taken to police headquarters in New York, I learned, before FBI men were there to identify him as the man they were seeking for the attack on me. All of this time, little Paul Allen had been held as a material witness in the U.S. Public Health Hospital at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. I guess after telling what he did, the police were afraid to let him be at liberty as long as Michael Kroll was still at large. I thought that the case would go swiftly to a conclusion now, but I underestimated the Krolls. Bice pleaded guilty to a charge of being an accessory after the fact in their crime, and was sentenced to a term of 5 years. The Krolls were placed in Fulton Tower in Chattanooga and were charged with violating the Lindbergh Law on the kidnapping charge, which carries a penalty of death. Court-appointed lawyers had entered not guilty pleas for them and were trying to get a change of venue. But in the quiet of their cells, George and Michael Kroll were plotting. They took metal food plates and fashioned rough types of their favorite weapons knives. Then, with 2 other prisoners, they made their bid for freedom on January 14, 1956. Suddenly flashing their knives, they overpowered 2 deputies, grabbed their keys, and broke out of their cells. They got as far as the rear basement door of the prison before the alarm rang and other deputies opened fire. Then they surrendered. I was frightened when I heard how close they had come to freedom. I would not have put it past them to come after me and try to kill me before the trial. Already threatened with the death penalty, they would hardly have hesitated at my murder. But this was the last chance they got because federal officers took the Krolls out of the local prison and moved them to the federal penitentiary for safekeeping. I still had one ordeal to endure. That was the trial which opened February 2, 1956, in Atlanta, Georgia, before a jury and U.S. Judge Frank Hooper. I had to live over again those long, terrible hours when I was their prisoner. Little Paul Allen told what he had seen, and then I had to take the witness stand and repeat everything that had happened to me. The Krolls sat staring at me all of the time, not a spark of remorse on their faces. In the 2 days of trial, a weak attempt to offer a defense for those men was made. Relatives testified that they had been wild from boyhood and they never thought George, especially, was quite right. That was an understatement if I ever heard one. But the cruelest and most unfair thing of all was when the Krolls tried to claim that I had consented to the terrible things they did to me. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. I did beg them to kill me that I admit to release me from their tortures. But that was all. 20 witnesses for the government backed up my story and piled up evidence against the Krolls. Psychiatrists said that they were legally sane, and Assistant U.S. Attorney Robert Sparks demanded the death penalty in the electric chair as the only proper penalty. Because of their viciousness, the Krolls came to court in handcuffs fastened to belts about their waists. But even so, I was glad to know that officers were in the room when I had to be within 4 walls with them. Their crimes caught up with George and Michael Kroll on Saturday morning, February 4, 1956. They rose and faced the jury and heard the foreman declare them guilty without recommendation of mercy. That meant that they must die for what they did to me, and the judge immediately sentenced them to the electric chair. They did not say a word, but as they were led from the courtroom to cells in death row, George Kroll for the first time walked with his head low on his chest. I feel no satisfaction in the fact that they will die. The law must take its course, and I only know that I was an innocent victim throughout. They selected me as the target for their savagery, and I hope that no other woman will ever have to go through what I did. Yes, I begged them to kill me, but I am alive with a memory that will never be blotted out, and it is for the Krolls that death awaits. It is the way the Lord must have willed it.